In this third part of the life of Soren Kierkegaard, we're going to follow him into the life of sensuality and pleasures. He was in deep doubt and didn't really know where to find himself, and neither what idea he should live and die for. This is where we left him in the second part, and he's still in his youth. We are in the beginning of the 1830s, and so this is what he does after writing these letters to his friend and thinking deeply about whether he should take the way of theology or study nature sciences, and where to find that idea for which I would live and die for, as he says some places. And he can see that he needs to realize becoming alive in a new way. And the way he does that is by being attracted to the theater. Besides philosophy and theology, he was very much attracted to seeing the theater, and was very fond of Don Juan, Mozart's famous composed play that took him with storm and became like the guider in his life into that period. He became very sensual and indulging in the pleasures. He's from a Christian traditional home that didn't really like these kind of activities and saw it as a sin that could lead him away from God's kingdom. And so he makes a note to himself at one point, saying that, well, being taken in by pleasures, that's isn't that the meaning of the word, to take God's kingdom with storm? And isn't that why we must work on our salvation with fear and tremblance? Because it's never finished and it's never ended. He means the life, but that a relapse is also possible. So he's back, reflecting still over his own way of living. And this is his project. Who is he, and what can he become? And how does all what's going on really affect him? It's like he does not want to give himself into the ideas of religion alone, and the ideas that he is bound by these moral structures and not really indulging in life as a whole. So in that period of his life, both we know that from his own diaries and from people who told a bit about it, but mostly from himself and the characters he put out to talk about this, it was the imitation of Don Juan, that lovesick character who liked to indulge in a kind of sensuality, especially with the girls and women. He also liked and circled around the idea of Faust, and that guy who wanted to know everything and indulge in everything, but it came with a great cost, a curse that he should really have been aware of, not to fall into. And so at one point he also had this idea that he wanted to become an actor, and in that way get a role, become a role in his own life, so his own life becomes a surrogate for the acting. So it's a way to get out of who he is and act it out and live it out at the same time. But he never fulfilled that, of course. He didn't go the way of the theater, but he was very fond of going in, listening to the, especially when the King's Theater showed Don Juan. Sometimes they also showed Figaro's marriage, that also affected him a lot. And then he went out acting on that and living it. So he became in that period what you can call, well, a person who was out to getting drunk and maybe getting closer and closer to that kind of sensual pleasure that he really had in many ways feared and held with a distance, and maybe not has been seen himself able to do. He was very keen on trying to charm some of the girls, especially a girl called Bolette. In the beginning he wanted to get closer to her family. Her mom was a widow from an upper class family, and so he went to visit them a lot, but everything failed for him because his way of being humoristic didn't work out for them, and she was more scared from him than she was really attached to him with his wits and way of seeing things in a humorous way. It's like he's taking light on even the serious issues that was very important. And that's like we saw recently in his quote. He's like turning even to take God's kingdom with storm into a kind of a joke that, well, okay, I'm going to indulge in these pleasures and I'm going to live it out. And so this is a way of understanding how the lust of the body is, and how it is to be taking um, God's morals very seriously with fear and tremblance. And so for him, everything becomes a project of trying it out and looking into it, how it does feel and how it works. And this is what his diary is also about. We have these notations. It's like he's an early stage of a psychological researcher who is doing things and then looking back, seeing, okay, how did that feel? And what was this about? And why did I get that and that feeling out of it? And what can I compare it to? And so, in the same time, it was like a connection between something that was comical and tragical. You get this impression from his diary that his own life was in that period going from being very black and dark and in these pubs and bad company of people who was just out to getting drunk and turned themselves into that sensual pleasure without thinking, without reflecting. And at the same time he wanted he went in the whole other direction of getting these very strong sense of guilt and insights of what he has been doing. It's like something in him was showing him what he was doing and what kind of person he's becoming. And so we have another notation here from November 10, 1836, where he's writing about Don Juan and that lovesick way of living life. And he says, after he looked into it, say, well, when it's too late, oh my God, that animalistic laughing. And so those who had looked in his story cannot find direct proof of him indulging in these sensual pleasures. Maybe it was just all in his fantasies and the reflections over it. And maybe he went only as far as going to the pubs and getting drunk, because at that period he had found a funny figure called Jørgensen, who died in 1866. He was an office worker in the police court. And the special thing about him was his double-sided life. In the daytime, he was the law and order man who just lived things according to the law and the morals at that time. And so in the evening, he went out to use all his money so he could stand up in the morning without even a penny in his pocket. And he liked to seek the company of younger, both males and females, not sure what it could lead to. And so he could like to sit and listen to their stories and tell them jokes and talk to them. And so he gave a lot of time to that. And Soren was really attached to this person for a period. He became like his drinking companion in a way. And he had these periods where he actually just shook himself out in the world just to hate it afterwards. This is how he thinks about these persons he's having the company of. That, well, they throw themselves out in the world and they must hate it afterwards. And so he got very attracted, as he says himself. He could see how these people were able to go and indulge themselves in things and places where there are a lot of people. They didn't like the idea of being alone for a lot of time. They had this irresistible need to go to people, go there where there is many, he says. And so he's reflecting about these things that happened to him with Jørgensen, that guy from the police office. And he could say that he started understanding when this guy was not only drunk, but over the edge. And he could see it by looking at the how the lips, they were formed on his face. and the things he went about babbling about, talking his life and how it is. And so we have him here, to, like giving us an account of this guy and how he's always complaining about his age and his life and saying, well, the half-life is to live, the other one is to regret. And I am very strongly in on the last part. And so he was really in a free fall according to his own values and ideas, going to places to do things that actually imitated Don Juan and imitated the life of these free-going people who were very attached more to sensuality and noise than attached to this deep thinking corner with the big trees, as he were in Galilea in earlier stage, writing his diary, wanting to find the idea for which he wanted to live and die for. And so he's like gone from looking into the life of Jesus and Paulus and apostles and theologians and how to fulfill God's kingdom in yourself, to looking into what is this Faust character doing, the Faust from Goethe, where he is he's in a pact with the devil, Mephistopheles, where he gives him everything and every knowledge and let him experience everything, but it comes with a curse, the loss of his soul, and that's a very heavy price to pay, as he would remark later. And he was also looking into the character of Don Juan and how things unfold. That's why it became like both something comical and tragical at the same time. And later on, well, he cannot really bear all this, and he says that, well, my life has, it's like going from one part to another. In periods it was that dark side of life that became dark in these pubs in bad company, and then later I'm in that company of the literature and philosophical works that really uplifted my mind, or uplifted his mind a lot. And so he could remember remarking in November 10, 1836, about that love sickness from Don Juan and Mozart's Figaro's marriage, when they, the day after, really could wake up to themselves. It's like they were indulging in something they didn't really want totally to be given into. And then, my God, he remarks, that animalistic laughing. And so it's not really clear whether he indulged in all these things. He was very much likely to have been in the arms of these both ladies and persons who really just took him away in drunkenness for some time. So he had this fall from grace, as they say, and he knew that he was on that path, as he also talks about in Stadia Polivit's Wife from 1845, looking back at that period, asking himself whether he was guilty or not guilty. And did he ever go and follow up on all this drunkenness and the theater pieces, the imitation of Don Juan, by really indulging in that sexual pleasure that is actually in the end station of what many people are really seeking? Nothing really tells, but those who had researched him had seen signs of him like deleting issues from his diary and saying that, well, I've thrown these things out. I've been telling the truth and the honest story about some things. And so some things has been missing. Maybe he didn't dare keep it there, or he got too shy about it after he wrote it. And so we have a notation from his diary where he says that he's talking in the name of somebody else, talking about the possibility that keeps that person really all the time endowed, giving himself in to the sensual pleasure, and at that same time, and then in the next day when the head is cleared and things is seen in a distance, he do not want these friends' company, this bad company of these people. So could that be like what he hasn't had the courage to talk openly about, that kind of indulgence in pleasures and in like seeking the lust of the inner senses and sexual pleasures. He We know that he's very close to that in this period. The bad, the nice girls, and so amidst his doubts and not really able to find his feet or what he wants to live and die for, he is living for that project of like indulging himself in life. Also, that low, bad side of it, as he later would realize, was not for him. Another thing that was in him was that he wanted the company of better girls to get closer to a relationship in a kind of marriage in the end. But it wasn't easy for him because he had already he was such a wit all the time that he says himself that, well, it wasn't easy. Even that girl that he liked, Bolette, the daughter of a widowed a lady, a priest's wife, was very difficult for him to get to. She was a few years younger than him, but the way he always used the wit, even on serious issues, well, maybe had her like get a reaction on him. She didn't feel she could understand him, and maybe she just reacted on him, and they grew apart. And that could also have given him a feeling of not really being able to go and become that popular figure in the houses of the people that he wanted to. And so the other way that was around is that the way with the sweet but bad girls and women and ladies. And there is a place where he's talking about, well, that could show a lot that he really had been in the arms of a lady that gave him that pleasure for money or just for the time that he spent there in one of these pubs. At the same time, he could be the center of attention among these low-standing people. And he says in one of his notes that, well, I have been to a company recently where I was the soul of it, all the jokes running out of my mouth, everybody laughing and really liking what I'm doing. And yeah, I went. And while I went, let me give a thinking pause, and that thinking pause should be as long as the radius of the earth. I wanted to go and shoot myself. Death and hell, I want to abstract from everything. I can do so, but not from myself. I cannot even forget myself when I'm asleep. And so he can feel that he has lost something, some innocence in him, some kind of naivety, and he has maybe met that raw sexuality, the animalistic laughing that really scared him a lot. It's like he was out of himself and somebody else indulging in that kind of pleasures. And so, because of his wit, he could find some joy in that place that was so fallen, according to his opinion and taste and look into himself. But at the same time, well, he couldn't, in that bourgeoisie home and good citizenship, people could not really understand him, especially the girls. And he tells especially about this girl Boletta, who died in 1887. Well, he was a charming young person who had the good ways of imitating some of these indulgers in how to talk to a woman and get to know her and get her attraction. But it's like it tipped over for him every time. It's like he could not get out of himself, and the wits took over in a way that scared her away from him, as the notations here talked. So here he was between that romantic dream of becoming engaged and then married to a girl from a good and respectable family, and at the same time had indulged in these erotic, sexual, and maybe bodily pleasures, or whether he has or not. Well, he was very close to it, and he was in that environment and had this drunken friend in his life, and then several others. And so he could feel how he became, like, in a way, cursed, as he says, over that selfishness and satisfaction of standing alone. Everybody will hate me now, but you, my God, would not take your hand off me. Let me live and become better. And in another place, he reflects on that with a very deep, sad word, saying, "Oh, what does it help a human if he won the entire world but hurt his soul?" And this is a very deep quote that shows the depth of his bitterness and tiredness, reflection over himself, the guilt that's swelling up in him and giving him a lot of trouble, both sleeping and also becoming what he wants to become. And so in these 2 years, 1836, 1837, we have him living this kind of life and shifting between the nice people, as they say, and the people that were from these pubs and places that, well, they wanted just to drown themselves in all the noise, as he would say in another way, someplace. And he had really affections for that girl Boletta from that family of the bishop's house, but the dead bishop's house. But he couldn't really get on, and it's like she was scared from him with his way of joking and being. It was like he was beside himself and not really in total harmony and contact with himself, and that just made the things not go right. And later we have in 1837 that the wife of his brother dies as well, and that takes hard on him in a way. And then in March of 1838, his confidant and close friend and teacher, Paul Martin Müller, the person we mentioned in the second part, that he had these conversations with, personal one-to-one conversations, he became very fond of. He died in that month of that year, in 1838, and so things became just just too heavy for him. At the same time, it was like kind of a wake-up call. He had trouble getting along with his dad at that period, who was very sad and heavy-minded, and then his teacher's death. All that gave like a kick. So he moved out of their home and moved to an apartment and tried to put himself together and find his psychological strength once more. And so he talked about this transfiguration in his diary, and he hoped that Christ should come to live in him again, and that he would come even through closed doors. That means even if he's not able to. At the same time, he can see that how his effect on others is actually becoming a curse. That he says that the devil of witness in me has come between me and many nice and good relations. And so he knows he has this side over him that irritates others people and makes them scare or make them keep away from him. So later on, he remarks, just like laughing at himself, that, well, in the Bible it's written that enjoy thee, I say to you, joy thee. But he says later, I am enjoying myself with my joy of, in, with, on, by my own joy. So you can see he has this clever witness in using the words in a polemic and sometimes very like sharp-minded, but also a bit close to the edge way. It's a bit crazy to say something like that. I'm enjoying myself by my joy of, in, with, on, by, and with my joy. Okay, what do we make out of that? The final, what can you say, hit he got in that year of 1838 was the death of his own father, the father he had an ambivalent relation to, but nonetheless defended his actions as coming out of love for them and out of the deep sense of religious certainty he had in his life, religious duty, sorry, in his life, not having the certainty whether he would be punished or being salvaged by God because of what he did in his youth. And this is the story of the whole family. He says once, he says, well, this is my father's story and this is ours too. It's like he can feel a curse like the father put in their heads that we are cursed for some reason. He was 11 years old, the dad, and had cursed God, looked up at heaven, cursed God for his situation as a herd boy and not really happy in what he was doing. But later God brought him out of it and gave him a lot of riches in Copenhagen, and he became a very wealthy tradesman. But that kept following him with his what so-called Christian heavy-mindedness, that, well, he had already done wrong to himself and his soul. What does it help that people liked them, and he had a status in society? He was already cursed. He was given of the bad mammon, like the earthly goods, but he was left out of God's grace. This is what he feared most in his own heart, his dad, and that affected both Soren and his brother. And in the end, this dad dies on him 8th of August 1838, 2 o'clock in the morning. And he notes later in his book that, well, he's not dead on me, but dead for me, because this is the last part he gave up for him in order for me to become whole or to find myself, or what, that kind of expression. It was out of love for me that he died, he thinks. And so a month later, he had already worked one of his first great works that didn't really make that impact, but had something to do with these hits that he got, the death of his teacher, the friend, companion in conversation, and then his dad, death of the wife of his brother. So he was surrounded by death in the family, and maybe felt it was getting nearer to himself as well. And then he had just indulged in everything that he should have been kept away from, and could feel afterwards that it wasn't the right thing that he had done. It didn't feel right, and it didn't feel like he really liked it. It was like part of him rejected it altogether and didn't like it so well. So he had to pull himself up from that place and that road he was on. And so he publishes this book in a critic of the famous author Jose Anderson's play that he's gonna talk about. Jose Anderson was the famous, we know that, the famous history teller, and became famous out in the world as well with his many fantastic adventures and stories taken out of reality, but put in a kind of adventurous way into stories that people could read, and became very famous in his time and later afterwards. So he's one of the great figures in Denmark as well, very known for those stories. But one of his first works weren't really all that good. It was called Only a Playfellow, Only a Playman. And he was very irritated over that mediocre way he was writing, and his way of and style of speaking and doing writing about the character and putting him into context, and a mediocre way of showing this hero in where he is. He could see through all the holes and trouble that this story had. And so he wrote that first book of his, of yet a living person's papers, to try to give that in-depth critique. But the critique was so deep that they couldn't publish it. It was so wide and like taking us into all directions, but it became one of the books that we later could read in and understand for him. And very funnily, as usual for him, he writes about that book of Yet a Living Papers, Living Person's Papers, he writes, well, for those who would like who would likely have read and taken damage of reading the what can you say, the first part of the book, can jump it over. And if they keep jumping and jumping over the whole story, they will end here in this aftermath, and so it can be all the same anyhow. And so it's like he's saying, if you have jumped over the preamble of the book, and you are here reading this final note and annex to the whole story that he has used so much time on and given all that space, well, he says, if you jump from the first part, because it might hurt you reading all that, and then you jump part and part over, you will end here where I'm writing you a final note telling you that it doesn't matter anyway. So it was like that kind of self-irony and that kind of thinking that, well, things maybe didn't matter all that much as we think they do. And this is also a kind of special way of looking at oneself and life, not taking yourself too seriously and not taking life too seriously around you, even though it is deep serious. So it's not because he's not serious, but that comic devil in him that could laugh at everything also managed to find a way to laugh at himself and his own work and how people would receive it and how he understood these mediocre ways people would like to look into things. And so he had that ability also to laugh, say, yeah, I can laugh with you on what I know you will be thinking or understanding. Well, what is that trouble with him and Jose Anderson? They were actually at the same time in Copenhagen. Jose Anderson had a very long and sad story in his youth, but later came to knock the doors of authors and writers in Copenhagen to find his way through to the environment that could maybe help him publish some of his works and his ideas. He left his mother alone in Fyn, in that island, middle island of Denmark, and took that long journey and insisted on keep knocking the doors and writing and showing himself to people who knew about literature and publication until he actually came through and became that famous figure that everybody talks about. And so it could also have something to do with that Jewish background that these group of authors and writers, they also had at this time, that it wasn't that easy. They were going from a society that were still not really total open to people who are not Lutheran. He was, of course, part of the Christian community on the surface, and so were everyone else around him. But to get into these circles of writers and special people was not that easy. And so when Soren Kierkegaard, had this writing on the text of Jose Anderson, and it seems to us today to be irrelevant. What can we use this for? It was an old play. The guy got famous later, and the other guy got famous later as well. So it was both a failed play and a failed answer in a way to it. But it was like a training act. The good thing about reading these things is, well, it's as if they are training themselves to the bigger works and the better and deeper qualities that they're going to show later. Maybe that's the reason for us, maybe me, looking into this and saying, oh, what is this all about and why is it so important? Because we know that Jose Anderson had his strength in writing these stories in a very much alive and beautiful way, using the words of his time that we can even read today with great pleasure. And the stories seems eternal. They can be understood generation after generation. Some of them has, of course, faded out more than others because they can be a bit cryptic and difficult to understand, but still people can relate to them, and people who read them get all kind of associations when they read his many beautiful and somehow eternal stories. He didn't get them all from his own head. He was also in Italy at some part, and I'm sure he got inspired by some sources he read about the Middle Ages, but he had a fantasy that was very great and used it in his pen to reflect on life. And this is the combination, to use the fantasy, the eternal way of telling stories, to reflect on the lived life. And that's what makes it remarkable, that we are both in a reality and fantasy world at the same time. So what is this about Soren Kierkegaard wanting to criticize Jose Anderson? Today it seems like, well, he should have kept back, but he didn't. Anyhow, we got over these past 2 years, 1836, 37, and into 1838, that became the year where things really changed for him, and he started with seriousness thinking about publishing. And he started really the publishing. It was like each year from that time had a new publication by his hand. And so some would say, well, it was the death of his father and the teacher that kicked that alive, and maybe that he already went out and understood that he could not live that Don Juan life that he thought he maybe wanted to imitate. And he started looking at that sensuality with a kind of distancing, and changed himself back to that person who wanted to live with the literature and uplift his soul with it and by it. Still, he couldn't align himself totally with the Christian ways of doing things. He wanted to go back and be religious, but he couldn't really do that. Still, the story tells us here that he went actually to church at one point and went to the altar. So, and for people who do not know the Christian way of life, it's going to the altar to receive the drink and the bread that really is the symbol of you sharing the meal with the Christ who you are related to, or who he was related to as a Christian. So it's like he's getting back, hanking up in himself and taking this experience with him to talk about it later in his life in several stories, as we would get to know. And maybe it's from there that he gets these three types of people: the one who's living the surface, and those who are indulging in sensualities, and then those who become religious, and then a deeper part of him becomes even deeper than religious, because it's not just being a theologian and discussing religion, but truly feeling the passion for it, living it in his true life. This he will come back to later. But so if you have had trouble reading and listening to what has been in the beginning, and you jumped and jumped in the YouTube video until you reached here, well, it doesn't really matter anyway, because I'm speaking out of love for these stories, reflecting on them in my own life, because I need them. And so I just found it much easier to talk to someone out there on YouTube, reflecting with somebody and maybe leaving it out, so somebody at one point in time would reach here and find some joy and goodness in reading this and or listening to it. I hope so, of course, but one is not really never sure what things are in the mind of others. So this is the third part, and in the fourth part we're gonna look more into how he got engaged to Regina Olsen, that girl that he loved. She was kind of new girl after he couldn't really get hold on that first girl, Boletta. There was something between him and Regina. There was a chemistry. He really wanted her, and so it will become his new pursuit in that period. And as well as he will be writing more and more more clearly in his diary about this, and it will fill a lot in his time, as we'll get back to. And he will also publish his book about the phrase irony, about the word irony, using Socrates as a picture of a person who used irony and humor to reflect on life. And this is a book that also became much everlasting in a way, because it had so many depths and meanings that people who liked philosophy and liked to read these issues kept trying to understand it and really wanted to get in depth of it. So we're going to talk about his love story and the irony both in it and what he's writing about in the next part.